The steak was still steaming when Celestina Brambilla's fork clattered against the metal tray. May 1944, Camp Florence, Arizona. The mess hall smelled like pepper and grease, smells that didn't exist anymore back home, smells from a different lifetime. 37 Italian women sat in rows, nurses and radio operators and partisans who'd been captured in the North African dust, now dropped into the American desert like pieces moved on a board game they didn't understand. Celestina stared at her plate. 16 ounces of T-bone steak. She knew it was 16 ounces because the American corporal had said so when he'd slapped it down, grinning like he was presenting a crown jewel. The meat hung over the edges of the plate. Mashed potatoes sat in a crater of melted butter that pooled yellow and obscene. 3 dinner rolls, creamed corn that actually had cream in it. A slice of apple pie sweating sugar. Her hands wouldn't move. 22 years old, and she'd forgotten what this much food looked like on one plate. The last 8 months had been dried fish and hard bread that turned your gums gray. Before that, rations in Sicily that came in bags labeled sufficient nutrition, but left your stomach eating itself at night. She looked left. Fosca Terrano. The radio operator from Genoa sat frozen, knife in one hand, staring at her own steak like it might vanish. Looked right. Renata Fossati, the partisan who never smiled, was pressing her fork into the mashed potatoes slowly, watching butter ooze up between the tines. The steak was so large Celestina could see the char marks from the grill. Steam rose off it in the dry Arizona heat. "Questo è per tutti noi?" Her voice came out thin. The American corporal, young, maybe 19, with red hair and freckles that made him look 12, turned. "Ma'am? This." She pointed at the steak with her whole hand, fingers shaking. "For all of us? We share?" He laughed. Genuinely confused laughter. "No, ma'am, that's yours." The words didn't compute. Celestina stood up. Her chair scraped against concrete. The sound echoed through the mess hall and conversation stopped. She picked up the steak with both hands, juice running between her fingers, and held it up like she was displaying evidence at a trial. "Guardate!" Her voice cracked. "Guardate!" Fosca's eyes went wide, then wet. Celestina walked down the aisle between tables, holding the steak aloft, and something broke loose in her chest. Not sadness exactly, not joy, but something that had been wound tight for so long it had fossilized. She started laughing, except the laugh kept catching in her throat and turning into these awful hiccuping sounds that might have been sobs. Look at this." She switched to Italian, her voice climbing. "One person. This is for one person." Behind her, someone started crying for real. Not performance crying, the kind that comes from a place you've been trying to brick over since North Africa. Fosca stood, up, grabbed her own steak, held it up, then Renata, then Maria, the nurse who'd been captured at Kasserine Pass, then all of them. What's the strangest moment of generosity you've ever witnessed? Something that completely broke your understanding of how the world worked. 37 Italian women standing in a prison camp mess hall, holding steaks with both hands like offerings, crying and laughing at the same time. Some were hugging each other, some just stood there with tears running down their faces, staring at the meat like it was speaking a language they'd forgotten existed. The American guards lined the walls, frozen. The corporal with the freckles looked at the sergeant, a man in his 40s with a tired face. "Sir, I don't... What did we—" The sergeant shook his head slowly. He'd fought in France in the First War. He'd seen plenty. But he had no framework for this. For women weeping over dinner. For joy and trauma wrapped so tight around each other you couldn't separate them with a knife. Celestina was back at her seat now, but she couldn't sit down. She held the steak with trembling hands and looked at it like she was memorizing every detail. The bone, the fat, the way the meat had been cooked until it was tender. She brought it close to her face and breathed in. The smell hit her like a physical thing. Protein, grease, char, life. She thought about her brothers in Milan, about how when she'd left they were eating soup made from potato peels and hope, about how her mother had been trading her wedding jewelry for flour on the black market, about how her father had started looking at the pigeons in the plaza with a different kind of hunger. And here she was. Enemy. Prisoner. Being given a steak bigger than her 2 hands. Fosca sat back down hard, still crying, and cut into her meat. The knife went through easy. She put a piece in her mouth. Her eyes closed. Someone at the next table made a sound that was half moan, half prayer. "Jesus Christ," the corporal whispered. "What was it like over there?" The sergeant didn't answer. Didn't need to. You could see it in how they ate. Fosca cut tiny pieces, precise, like she was trying to make it last forever. Renata ate slowly, eyes closed, jaw working carefully like she didn't trust her own senses. Some of the women couldn't eat at all. They just sat there crying, staring at their plates. Celestina finally cut into her steak. The inside was pink and perfect. She put a piece in her mouth and the taste exploded across her tongue. Salt, fat, smoke, everything her body had been screaming for. She chewed slowly, swallowed, cut another piece. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Across the hall, Maria the nurse had her face in her hands, shoulders heaving. Her steak sat untouched. The woman next to her, Anna, was trying to comfort her while simultaneously crying into her own mashed potatoes. The corporal walked over to Maria, crouched down next to her chair. "Ma'am, is the food okay? We can get you something else if—" Maria looked up at him with red eyes. "Okay?" She laughed and it came out broken. "Okay?" She gestured at the plate, at the abundance, at the impossible reality of it. Then she couldn't speak anymore, just shook her head and cried harder. The corporal stood there, helpless. He looked back at the sergeant. The sergeant made a small gesture. Leave them be. Celestina ate her entire steak, every ounce. She ate the potatoes, the rolls, the creamed corn, the pie. She couldn't stop. Her stomach hurt. 8 months of near starvation meant it couldn't handle this much richness. But she couldn't stop. When she finally set down her fork, she felt sick and full and guilty and grateful all at once. Around her, women were still crying. Some were laughing now, too. Fosca had butter on her chin and tears on her cheeks, and she was smiling. Actually smiling. This dreamy, disbelieving smile like she'd been granted a vision. The American guards still stood against the walls, watching, not understanding. They didn't know that this meal was a confession. That every bite said, "Your enemy sees you as human. Your enemy doesn't want you to starve." They didn't know that you could build a war on lies about the other side's cruelty, but you couldn't maintain it after they fed you like family. Celestina wiped her eyes, looked down at her empty plate. At the bone sitting there, picked clean, proof this had been real. Tomorrow, they'd wake up and still be prisoners, still be at war, still be enemies on paper. But tonight, the math had changed. The box sat on Fosca's bunk like a small brown landmine. 2 weeks after the steak incident, Camp Florence's commander had authorized care packages. Standard prisoner welfare, the memo said. Build goodwill, it said. What it didn't say was what happened when you gave starving women from a collapsing nation 6 Hershey's bars, a pack of Wrigley's gum, Camel cigarettes, Ivory soap, and a jar of Skippy peanut butter. Fosca Terraneo, 29, radio operator, Genoa, stared at the unopened box on her wool blanket. Round her, the barracks erupted. Women shrieked. Someone dropped a jar and it shattered, peanut butter spreading across concrete. Maria was crying again. Everyone was always crying now. Fosca's hands shook as she tore the cardboard flap. The Hershey's bar sat on top, brown wrapper gleaming. She lifted it like it might explode. The weight felt wrong, too heavy, too real. 3 months ago in Genoa, she'd been eating bread made with sawdust and potato peels. Her sister had written that little Tommaso, age 7, had forgotten what chocolate tasted like. She unwrapped one corner. The smell hit her first. "Madonna Santa," she whispered. One bite. Just one, she told herself. She broke off a single square and placed it on her tongue. The chocolate melted. Rich, sweet, impossibly smooth. Nothing like the gritty wartime substitute they'd called chocolate back. Home. The stuff that tasted like burned coffee and sadness. She took another bite. Her hands started shaking harder. The third bite she barely chewed. Just let it dissolve, and something inside her chest cracked open like an egg. Fosca stood up so fast her bunk creaked. The other 5 Hershey's bars tumbled to the floor. She didn't pick them up. She walked straight toward the door, toward the fence line where the afternoon guard stood, clutching the half-eaten bar like evidence. Too much! She reached the chain-link fence, pushed the chocolate through the gaps toward Private Morrison, the baby-faced Oklahoma kid who looked about 19. Troppo! Troppo! Morrison stepped back, confused. Ma'am? Take back! Fosca shoved the bar harder against the fence. Is mistake! Too much! You punish later when you know. Her English fell apart. She switched to rapid Italian, gesturing frantically. This was a test. Had to be. The Americans were checking if they'd be greedy, if they'd take more than their share. Then would come the punishment. Always came punishment when you took too much. Ma'am, those are yours. Morrison's drawl stretched the words. You can have 'em. All of 'em. No. Fosca's voice cracked. No. Is trick. I know tricks. She sank to her knees in the Arizona dirt, still holding the chocolate bar through the fence. Her throat closed. Not now. Not in front of the guard. But the tears came anyway, hot and furious, because she'd survived Genoa's bombings and her father's death in the transport ship from North Africa, and a fucking candy bar was what finally broke her. Morrison crouched down on his side of the fence, eye level now. Ma'am, Hold on. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a Hershey's bar, tore it open, made direct eye contact with Fosca, then ate the entire thing in 6 huge bites, wrapper crinkling, chocolate smearing slightly on his lip. See? He swallowed. We got plenty. You ain't gonna get in trouble. Fosca's vision blurred. The casual waste of it. The abundance so complete he could devour a whole bar just to prove a point. The America of it. She slid down the fence until she was sitting completely in the dust, knees to chest, still clutching her chocolate. The crying turned ugly. Gasping, shoulder-shaking sobs that she couldn't control. Movement behind her. Renata appeared first, then Maria, then 4 others. They didn't say anything. Just sat down in the dirt next to Fosca, forming a line against the fence. Some held their own Hershey's bars. Some held nothing. All of them were crying. Morrison stood frozen on the other side, a teenage kid from a place where chocolate was common as rain, watching 7 Italian women weep in the dust over candy bars. He looked toward the guard tower. The sergeant there just shook his head. Let it happen. Ma'am, Morrison tried again, his voice cracking now too. It's yours, I promise. We got so much, you don't even know, Fosca. Lifted her head. Tears cut clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. She looked at the half-eaten Hershey's bar in her hand, then at Morrison's young face, then at the 5 untouched bars back on her bunk, visible through the barracks window. How? She whispered in broken English. How you have this much? Morrison opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer that would make sense. How do you explain American abundance to someone who's been starving? How do you describe a nation where chocolate was cheap, where food was everywhere, where plenty was so normal you didn't even notice it? I don't know, ma'am, he finally said. I really don't. Fosca took another bite of her chocolate. This time she let herself taste it. Really taste it. She closed her eyes and remembered Tommaso before the war, his face smeared with chocolate from his 5th birthday cake. The good chocolate, when they could still afford good things. Before the rations. Before the bombings. Before everything. When she opened her eyes, Morrison was still there. Still crouching. Still looking like he wanted to fix something he couldn't name. Thank you, Fosca said. The English words felt strange in her mouth, formal and insufficient. Thank you. She stood up slowly, joints protesting from sitting in the dirt. The other women rose with her, a collective movement. They walked back toward the barracks together, shoulders touching, some still crying, some gone quiet. Fosca gathered her 5 remaining Hershey's bars from the floor, lined them up on her bunk in a neat row. She wouldn't eat them all today, maybe not tomorrow either. She would make them last, write to her sister about them, try to explain the impossible, that their enemies had given her chocolate, that she'd cried about it, that a teenage boy from somewhere called Oklahoma had eaten a whole candy bar just to prove she was safe. That night, Celestina found Fosca sitting on her bunk, staring at the chocolate bars like they were religious artifacts. "You okay?" Celestina asked. Fosca touched one bar with her fingertip. "I think they're trying to kill us with kindness." Celestina sat down beside her. "Is it working?" Fosca thought about Morrison's face, the casual way he'd eaten that chocolate, the abundance so complete it was thoughtless. She thought about her sister's letters, about Tommaso forgetting tastes, about everything they'd lost. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think it is." The washtub sat in the middle of the recreation yard like a silver coffin filled with ice. Renata Fossati circled it slowly, hands shoved in her pockets, watching American soldiers grab green glass bottles and pop the caps with practiced flicks of their wrists. Each bottle hissed. Steam rose from the ice. She'd been in Arizona 3 months and still couldn't process ice in July. "Coca-Cola," the corporal announced, gesturing at the tub. "Help yourselves, ladies. It's a party." Party. Renata turned the word over in her mind. Behind her, a baseball game was happening. Americans teaching Italian POWs to swing wooden bats at balls. Someone had hung red, white, and blue streamers. A radio played something jazzy and incomprehensible. This was what Americans considered prison. Celestina appeared at her elbow, already holding a dripping bottle. "Try it. It's cold." "Everything here is cold," Renata muttered, but she approached the tub anyway. The bottle was so cold it hurt to hold. She turned it in her hands, studying the cursive script. The glass was thick, heavier than wine bottles back home. She could smell something sweet and sharp, like caramel mixed with medicine. She popped the cap. The hiss made her flinch. Fosca laughed nearby. "It's angry." Renata sniffed the opening. Bubbles tickled her nose. She took a small sip. The carbonation hit her tongue like tiny explosions. Sweet, impossibly sweet, but also bitter and bright and strange. The cold burned down her throat. She gasped. Then she took another sip, and another. "Renata?" Maria's voice sounded far away. The sweetness was overwhelming. When was the last time she'd tasted sugar? Real sugar, not the synthetic garbage they'd been getting in Italy. Her tongue practically sang. She tipped the bottle back and chugged. The carbonation filled her mouth, her throat, her chest. She didn't care. She drained the entire bottle in 4 long swallows, gasping between each one, and slammed the empty glass down on the tub's edge. "Ancora!" Another. The American soldiers cheered. One of them, the corporal who'd offered the first bottle, grinned and handed her a fresh one. "That's the spirit, ma'am." She downed the second bottle almost as fast. The bubbles seemed to expand in her stomach. Her eyes watered. She reached for a third. "Renata, maybe slow." Celestina started. "I'm fine." She popped the third cap. This one she tried to sip, but the sweetness called to her. How could something this good exist while people were starving? She chugged it anyway. The fourth bottle went down easier, or harder. She couldn't tell anymore. Her stomach felt like it was floating. The bubbles seemed to be rising back up her throat. She set the empty bottle down carefully, stood up straight, opened her mouth to say something dignified. "Burp!" The sound echoed across the recreation yard. The baseball game stopped. Every head turned. Renata's face went hot. She clamped her hand over her mouth. "Burp!" Louder this time. Her whole chest vibrated. Fosca started giggling, then Maria, then 3 other women dissolved into laughter. Renata tried to speak. Burp. "I can't." Burp. "Stop." She was mortified. She was Renata Fossati, partisan fighter, radio operator who'd dodged German patrols in the Alps. She'd been captured with dignity. She'd maintained composure through interrogations, transport, imprisonment. Brrrb. The American soldiers were howling. Even the camp commander was trying not to smile. Renata felt another one building. She tried to hold it in, her cheeks puffed out, her eyes watered. The pressure built and built, and burp! She fell off the bench, just toppled sideways into the dirt, one hand still clutching an empty Coke bottle, burping uncontrollably every 10 seconds. And suddenly she was laughing too. Laughing so hard her stomach hurt, which made her burp more, which made her laugh harder. Celestina collapsed next to her, wheezing. Fosca fell over backward. Maria was on her hands and knees, gasping for air between giggles. Within seconds, 8 Italian POWs were rolling in the Arizona dust, crying with laughter, while Renata burped like a broken foghorn every time she tried to catch her breath. Burp. I hate. Burp. All of you. Burp. Someone pressed another Coke into her hand. She looked up. Private Morrison, the baby-faced guard who'd eaten chocolate with Fosca, was grinning down at her. Want one more? You're evil, she gasped. But she took it anyway. She didn't chug this one. She sipped it slowly, lying on her back in the dirt, watching the Arizona sky turn orange. Each sip brought a gentle burp. Each burp brought fresh giggles from the women around her. A camera clicked. She turned her head and saw one of the guards with a Kodak. For the camp records, he said sheepishly. She should have been angry. She should have demanded dignity. Instead, she raised her Coke bottle in a salute and let out one more enormous burp. The flash went off. That night, lying in her bunk, Renata's stomach still felt strange. Not sick, just full of air and sweetness and something else, something light. You okay? Celestina whispered from the next bunk. Renata touched her face. Her cheeks hurt from smiling. When was the last time her face had hurt from smiling? I forgot, she said quietly. Forgot what? How to laugh. Her voice cracked. Really laugh. Not bitter, not sarcastic. Just laugh. Celestina's hand found hers in the darkness between bunks. They're good to us, Renata continued. Too good. It doesn't make sense. We're enemies. Are we? Renata thought about the soldiers cheering as she chugged Coca-Cola, the camera capturing her joy instead of her humiliation. The way Morrison had offered her one more bottle, not as a guard to a prisoner, but as one person to another. I don't know what we are anymore, she admitted. She fell asleep, tasting phantom sweetness on her tongue, one hand still pressed to her stomach where the bubbles had been. In 60 years, she would open her wallet to show her grandchildren a photograph. A woman on the ground, mid-laugh, surrounded by empty green bottles, her face bright with something that looked like freedom. But she would never drink another Coca-Cola. She would open a distributorship in Newark, sell millions of bottles, make more money than she'd dreamed possible. Why don't you drink it? Her granddaughter would ask decades later. Renata would touch the photograph. Because that first one was perfect. And perfect things should stay perfect. The charcoal pencil snapped. Celestina stared at the broken pieces in her palm. She'd been sketching Maria's profile for 20 minutes, getting the curve of her jaw just right when the lead gave out. Third pencil this week. Art supplies were running low again. You need break anyway. Maria stretched her neck. My face is tired. September heat pressed through the recreation room windows. Celestina gathered her scattered drawings, portraits of Fosca laughing, Renata mid-burp, a group sketch from the 4th of July. 4 months of faces. 4 months of women she'd watched transform from hollow-eyed prisoners into something almost recognizable as their former selves. The door opened. Sergeant Eugene Blackwell stood there holding a dinner plate covered with a checkered cloth, looking like he might bolt at any second. Ma'am, Miss Brambilla, I brought something. His Georgia drawl stretched the words thin. Maria's eyebrows shot up. She grabbed her things and practically sprinted for the door, shooting Celestina a look that said everything. Eugene set the plate on the scarred wooden table. His hands shook. Celestina had watched those hands before, during their Italian lessons, when he struggled with pronunciation, fingers tapping nervous rhythms on his notebook. He attended every Tuesday and Thursday, supposedly to learn basic phrases. Mostly, he just watched her draw, asked halting questions about Milan, about art, about things that had nothing to do with verbs or grammar. "I made this." He pulled back the cloth. "In the staff kitchen. It ain't fancy. Meatloaf. A thick slice, still steaming, with some kind of red glaze on top. Green beans on the side. 2 dinner rolls, butter melting into their centers." Celestina's throat tightened. The smell hit her. Beef, onions, something sweet in the glaze. Homemade. Not mess hall food slopped onto plates by kitchen staff. Someone's hands had shaped this. Someone's recipe. "You cook this?" Her English came out fractured. "For me?" "Yes, ma'am." Eugene's face went red. "My mama's recipe. She always said meatloaf's about making something good from simple things. And I just thought... He couldn't finish. Stood there like a man facing a firing squad. Celestina picked up a fork, cut a small piece. The meat was tender, seasoned with something that tasted like comfort, like the meals her own mother used to make before the war swallowed everything good. She chewed slowly. Eugene watched her face like it held his entire future. The tears came before she could stop them. Not the hysterical crying from the steak, or the overwhelmed sobbing from the chocolate. These were different, quieter. They rolled down her cheeks while she took another bite, then another. In Italy. She set down the fork, reaching across the table for his hand. Didn't care about rules or propriety, or the fact that he was her guard and she was his prisoner. Her fingers wrapped around his calloused palm. In Italy, no food. My brother's, thin, like... She gestured, unable to find the English word. Shadows. Ghosts. You give me food. Every day, food. You give me... She touched her chest, right over her heart. Humanity. Eugene's eyes went glassy. This farm boy who'd spent every lesson apologizing for his accent, who'd asked her once if she thought he was stupid for not finishing school, who'd shown her a photo of his mama's small house in rural Georgia with something like shame in his voice. He started crying. "You ain't supposed to be kind to me," he whispered. Nobody like you ever... Eat." Celestina pushed the plate between them, breaking off a piece of meatloaf with her fingers. "Share." They sat there in the Arizona Recreation Room, a prisoner of war and a farm boy sergeant, sharing a plate of his mama's meatloaf while tears dripped onto the checkered cloth. Through the window, Celestina could see other women in the yard. Fosca, reading a letter from her sister. Renata, teaching a guard how to curse in Italian. Maria, hanging laundry, humming something that might have been jazz. Eugene pulled out a handkerchief, wiped his eyes. "I've been wanting to ask you something." His voice steadied. "But I don't know if it's proper, if it's allowed. I don't even know if... Ask? When this is over, when you go home to Italy." He gripped the table edge. Could I write you letters? Could we stay in touch?" Celestina thought of Milan, of rubble where her street used to be, of her mother's last letter saying there was nothing left, everyone scattered. Come home to what? She thought of the T-bone steak that had broken her 4 months ago, of chocolate bars and Coca-Cola and this meatloaf made by careful hands. She thought of Eugene's face when she'd corrected his Italian pronunciation last week, how he'd lit up like she'd given him a gift instead of criticism. "Yes," she squeezed his hand. "You write. I write. We see what happens." His smile could have powered the whole camp. They finished the meal together, passing the plate back and forth, Eugene telling her about his mama's garden, Celestina describing the art academy she'd attended before the war. The food disappeared. The sun angled lower. Neither of them moved to leave. "You gonna get in trouble?" Celestina finally asked. For being here. With me. Don't care. Eugene's jaw set stubborn. This is the first time in my whole life something feels right. A knock at the door. Private Morrison stuck his head in, took one look at their clasped hands and tear-stained faces, and quietly backed out. 3 months later, on a December morning cold enough to make Arizona feel almost foreign, Eugene would kneel in this same recreation room with a ring his grandmother had worn, asking a question in broken Italian he'd practiced 100 times. Celestina would say yes in English, then Italian, then yes again just to be sure he understood. But right now, in this moment, there was just meatloaf and 2 people who'd found something neither expected in the middle of a war. Celestina picked up her broken charcoal pencil. You sit. I draw you now. Me? But I'm not worth... Sit. Eugene sat. She sketched quickly, capturing the vulnerable hope in his eyes, the way his hands rested gentle on the table, the small smile he couldn't quite hide. When she finished, she turned the paper around. He stared at his own face like he'd never seen it before, like she'd drawn someone worth looking at. That's really how you see me? Yes. He folded the drawing carefully, tucked it in his shirt pocket right over his heart. Years later, when Celestina's restaurant in Georgia became famous for its Italian-American fusion, when food critics from Atlanta came to review the T-bone with marinara sauce, Eugene would still carry that drawing in his wallet. Creased and faded, but treasured. On the wall of their restaurant, they'd frame another picture, the 2 of them on opening day, 1952, standing in front of a menu board advertising the steak special. But Celestina would always say the real beginning was here, a recreation room in Arizona, a plate of meatloaf, 2 people brave enough to see each other as human. The door opened again. Fosca poked her head in, grinning. Celestina, you coming to dinner? Or you too busy with... She caught sight of the empty plate and their hands still intertwined. Ah, I see. I go now. She left singing something that sounded suspiciously like a wedding march. Eugene laughed. Actually laughed. I should probably... Yes, you should go. Neither of them moved. Outside, the dinner bell rang. The sound of women's voices rose. Renata shouting about something, Maria's laugh carrying across the yard. 4 months ago, those voices had been hollow. Now they were alive. Eugene stood finally, gathering the empty plate. At the door, he turned back. Tomorrow? Same time? I could bring, maybe pie? Tomorrow, Celestina agreed. You bring pie. I teach you more Italian. Deal? Deal. He left, and she sat alone in the fading light, thinking about meatloaf and humanity and how the strangest gifts sometimes came wrapped in checkered cloth, delivered by shaking hands that knew how to be gentle in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. The mess hall looked different in December. Same wooden tables, same Arizona dust coating the windows. But the smell, turkey, sage, cranberry sauce bubbling in steel pots, made Fosca Terraneo's throat close up. She gripped the edge of the bench, remembering last Christmas, Genoa. No heat. Tommaso asking why baby Jesus didn't bring them bread. The turkey sat on her plate now, real turkey. Stuffing. A wedge of pumpkin pie that trembled when she touched the table. You gonna eat that? Maria asked beside her, already halfway through her own portion. Fosca couldn't answer. In 3 days, they'd board a transport ship. Italy. Home. The word felt foreign in her mouth, sharp-edged. She'd been practicing her speech for weeks, writing English words on scraps of paper, asking Private Morrison for corrections. Tonight. She'd do it tonight. Celestina sat across from her, picking at her stuffing. Eugene stood against the far wall in his dress uniform, watching her with that same desperate softness he'd worn since September. His eyes kept sliding to Celestina's hands, like he was memorizing them. I can't go back, Renata muttered to Fosca's left. She said it in Italian, low and sharp. I can't eat dirt again. I can't watch people starve. I can't... Then don't. Fosca looked at her. Renata's face had filled out in 18 months. Her cheeks had color. The hollow-eyed partisan who'd arrived in July 1944, dead behind the eyes, was gone. This woman laughed at baseball games. This woman burped and didn't apologize. "They won't let us stay," Renata said. "Then we come back." Fosca touched the pocket of her dress where the Hershey's wrapper lived, folded into a perfect square. She'd carried it every day for 18 months, slept with it under her pillow. Sometimes she unfolded it just to read the letters. HERSHEYS. Proof it had been real. The camp commander stood up, tapping his glass. Speeches, protocol. Fosca stopped listening. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The paper in her other pocket felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Do it now, before you lose your nerve. She stood up. The scrape of her chair cut through the commander's words. Every head turned. Fosca's legs shook so hard she had to grip the table. She pulled out her speech, 3 pages, covered in cramped English words and Morrison's red pen corrections. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "I have something to say. In English, please." The commander gestured for her to continue, sitting back down. The mess hall went silent. Fosca could hear her own breathing, ragged and too fast. "When we come here," she began, reading from her paper, hands trembling, "we are told Americans are enemies. We are told you are cruel. We are told many lies." Her voice steadied. She'd practiced this. She could do this. "I am radio operator. I send messages. I think I know about war, about enemies." She looked up from the paper, found Private Morrison standing by the kitchen door. He was 19, baby-faced, the first American who'd showed her kindness. "But I know nothing." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wrapper, held it up. The overhead lights made the silver foil shine. "This chocolate, I get this 18 months ago. First day." She heard her accent mangling the words, but she kept going. "I never forget. Not because it tastes sweet." She pressed the wrapper to her chest. "Because it was first time in war someone see me as person. Not soldier, not enemy, not prisoner. Person." Her eyes burned. "Not now. Finish it first. I eat sawdust bread in Genoa. I watch my nephew forget what sugar tastes like. I watch my father—" She couldn't say it in English. The word died. "My father die from hungry from—" "No food." The tears came anyway. She didn't wipe them. "Then I come here, to enemy, and enemy give me steak." She laughed, wet and broken. "Big steak. Like this." She held her hands apart, demonstration. Several guards smiled. "Enemy, give me chocolate. 6 bars. 6. I think it is trick. I think I am crazy." She looked at Celestina now. "My friend, she cry over steak. We all cry. Americans think we are crazy women." More laughter rippled through the room, shaky and cathartic. "But we cry because... She switched to Italian, helpless. "Because I had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a human being." Then back to English. "I come to America as enemy. I leave as—" She searched for the word. Morrison had helped her practice this part. "I leave, loving you." The mess hall erupted. Not applause, crying. Fosca saw Maria drop her face into her hands. Celestina covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Eugene crossed the room in 4 strides and wrapped Celestina in his arms. Protocol be damned. The commander didn't stop him. Then Renata was on her feet, chair clattering backward. "I stay!" she shouted in English, pointing at the floor like she was claiming territory. "I no go back. I stay America." Fosca stared at her. "Renata." "I stay!" Renata's face was bright red, defiant and terrified. "I no care about laws. I no go back to Hungary. I no—" She switched to Italian, rapid fire. "I can't do it again, Fosca. I can't watch my mother eat potato peels. I can't sit in the dark because we sold the furniture for firewood. I can't—" "Me too." Maria stood up, voice quiet but firm. "I stay too." Another woman rose. "I stay." Then another. "I stay." 5 women standing now, then 7, then 11. The commander cleared his throat. "Ladies, I appreciate the sentiment, but legally you have to return to Italy first. You're still POWs technically. The paperwork, then we come back," Fosca said, switching to English, voice steady now. "We go to Italy. We see family. Then we come back. We immigrate. Correct word? Immigrate?" Morrison nodded from the doorway, grinning. "Yes," Fosca said. "We immigrate. We come back to America." The commander looked at his second-in-command, who shrugged helplessly. "Oh, get you the forms," the commander said finally. "For immigration applications. You'll have to apply through proper channels, but—" He trailed off, looking at the 11 women standing there, crying and defiant and desperate. "Thank you," Fosca said. She folded her speech carefully, tucking it into her pocket alongside the Hershey's wrapper. "Thank you for seeing us. For—" She touched her heart, unable to find the English. "For humanity." She sat down. Renata grabbed her hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Across the table, Celestina had her face buried in Eugene's shoulder, both of them shaking with silent sobs. Fosca looked down at her turkey, now cold. She picked up her fork and ate, because this was what hope tasted like. Turkey and stuffing and the promise of return. She'd go back to Genoa. She'd hold Tommaso, who'd be 9 now, probably wouldn't remember her face. She'd visit her father's grave. She'd tell her sister about the chocolate, the steak, the boy from Oklahoma who proved Americans had hearts. Then she'd come back. The photograph was taken an hour later, after the crying stopped. 11 women lined up outside the mess hall, holding their immigration applications like diplomas. Fosca stood in the center, the Hershey's wrapper visible in her hand, creased and silver in the desert moonlight. She'd carry it for 60 more years. When her grandchildren asked about the war, she'd unfold it carefully, the foil tissue-thin from handling. "This," she'd say in accented English that never quite smoothed out, "this is the chocolate that taught me the enemy could be kind." In 1952, a newspaper would photograph Celestina and Eugene outside their Georgia restaurant. Behind them, the menu board would advertise T-bone steak special, 16 Oz, the one that started it all. Celestina would stand with one hand on Eugene's shoulder, the other touching her heart, the universal gesture she'd used that first night in the mess hall when words failed. Fosca would frame that newspaper clipping, hang it in her New York apartment where she worked as a translator at the UN. On slow days, when the delegate speeches dragged and the world felt cruel again, she'd look at Celestina's face in the photo, that smile, wide and unguarded, and remember. Enemy was just a word. Chocolate was a promise, and America kept its promises.